Amir had also come, this time without his flock. He had brought the Bedouin to whom Abu Bakr had entrusted the 2 camels he had chosen for their journey. The man was not yet a believer, but he could be relied on to keep their secret, and also to guide them to their destination by such out-of-the-way paths as only a true son of the desert would know. He was waiting in the valley below with the 2 mounts, and had brought a 3rd camel for himself. Abu Bakr was to take Amir behind him on his, to look after their needs. When Abu Bakr offered the Prophet the better of the 2 camels, he said, "I will not ride a camel that is not mine own." "But she is thine, O Messenger of God," said Abu Bakr. "Nay," said the Prophet, "but what price didst thou pay for her?" Abu Bakr told him, and he said, "I take her at that price." Nor did Abu Bakr insist further on making it a gift, although the Prophet had accepted many gifts from him in the past, for this occasion was a solemn one. It was the Prophet's HIJRAH, his cutting off of all ties of home and homeland for the sake of God. His offering, the act of emigration, must be entirely his, not shared by another in any respect. The mount on which the act was accomplished must therefore be his own, since it was part of his offering. The camel's name was Qaswa, and she remained his favorite camel. Their guide took them away from Mecca to the west and a little to the south, until they came to the shore of the Red Sea. Yathrib is due north of Mecca, but it was only at this point that any north came into their direction. The coastal road runs northwest, and for a few days they kept to this. Shortly before dawn on the 12th day after leaving the cave, they reached the valley of Akik, and crossing the valley, they climbed up the rugged black slopes on the other side. Before they reached the top, the sun was well up and the heat was intense. On other days they would have stopped for rest until the great heat of the day had passed. But they now decided to climb the final ridge of the ascent, and when at last they came within sight of the plain below, there could be no question of holding back. The place that the Prophet had dreamed of, the well-watered land between 2 tracts of black stones, was lying before them, and the grey-green of the palm groves and the lighter green of orchards and gardens stretched at one point to within 3 miles of the foot of the slope they had to descend. The nearest point of greenery was QUBA, where most of the emigrants from Mecca had first stayed, and where many of them still were. The Prophet told their guide, "Lead us straight to QUBA, and draw not yet nigh unto the city," for so the most densely inhabited part of the oasis was called. That city was soon to be known throughout Arabia, and thence elsewhere, as the city, in Arabic, Al-Madinah, in English, Medina. The Prophet had reached the oasis on Monday the 27th of September, A.D. 622. Various messages soon made it clear that the people of Medina were impatient for his arrival there, so he only stayed 3 full days in QUBA, where he laid the foundations of a mosque, the first to be built in Islam. Amongst the men who came to meet him during those days, there was one who was very different in appearance from any of the inhabitants of the oasis. His name was SALMAN, and he had been born of Persian Zoroastrian parents not far from Isfahan. But he had become a Christian as a very young man, and had a series of attachments to venerable elderly Christian sages, until the last of these, on his deathbed, told him that the time of the coming of a prophet was very near, a prophet who would be sent to the Arabs with the religion of Abraham. Determined to join this prophet, Salman set off for that part of Arabia indicated by the dying man. But by the time he reached his destination, he was no longer a free man. His Arab travelling companions sold him as a slave to a Jew, who then sold him to another Jew, his cousin, who lived not far from QUBA. Nonetheless, when he heard of the Prophet's arrival, Salman contrived to absent himself from his work long enough to go to QUBA and spend a few precious moments in the presence of his chosen guide, whose prophethood he recognized there and then. On the Friday morning the Prophet mounted Qaswa, and Abu Bakr and others of Quraysh also mounted their camels and set off with him for the city. To the right and to the left of them, dressed in armour with their swords drawn, rode men of Aus and Khazraj, as a guard of honour, and by way of demonstration that the oath they had taken to protect him was no empty word, though they knew well that then and there he would need no protection. Never was a day of greater rejoicing. "Come is the Prophet of God! Come is the Prophet of God!" was the joyous cry that went up from more and more voices of men and women and children who had lined the route. Qaswa set the slow and stately pace of the procession as it passed amid the gardens and palm groves to the south of Medina. The houses were still few and far between, but gradually they entered more closely built districts, and many were the eager invitations which were offered. "Alight here, O Messenger of God, for we have strength and protection for thee, and abundance." More than once a man or a group of clansmen took hold of Qaswa's halter, but each time the Prophet blessed them and then said, "Let her go her way, for she is under the command of God." At one point it seemed as if she were making for the houses of the Prophet's nearest kinsmen, of the Adi branch of the great Khazrajite clan of Najjar, for she turned into the eastern part of the city where most of the clan lived. But she passed by the place where he had stayed with his mother as a child, and by all the other houses of those nearest to him, despite their earnest entreaties that he should make his home there. The Prophet gave them the same reply that he had given to the others, and they could only submit. He had now reached the houses of the Bani Malik branch of Najjar. To this sub-clan belonged two of those 6 men who had pledged allegiance to him the year before the first Aqaba, As'ad and Auf, and here Qaswa turned from the road into a large walled courtyard which had in it a few date palms and the ruins of a building. One end had been used at some time as a burial ground. There was also a place set apart for drying dates. Slowly she made her way towards a rough enclosure which As'ad had set up as a place of prayer, and there, at the entrance, she knelt. The Prophet let go her rein, but did not alight, and after a moment she rose to her feet and began to walk leisurely away. But she had not gone far when she stopped, turned in her tracks, and walked back to where she had first knelt. Then she knelt again, and this time she flattened her chest against the ground. The Prophet alighted and said, "This, if God will, is the dwelling."